If you want to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon page to gain access to exclusive videos, take part in Q&As, and watch my retrospectives before they go live on YouTube. Ghostbusters Afterlife's release date has been delayed perhaps 4 times over the pandemic, and it's finally here. The third entry in the Ghostbusters franchise, directed and co-written by Jason Reitman, the son of Ivan, who had directed Ghostbusters 1 and 2. The film has so far been received well, with critics praising the performances, the direction, but it has been criticised for its over-reliance on fan service, and following familiar plot beats to the previous entries, especially with its third act. Ghostbusters 3 had been talked about and rumoured throughout the 90s. Dan Aykroyd has always been pushing for another film along with the late Harold Ramis. There had been a number of scripts written over the years which had been leaked and fans had read through them, and most weren't impressed. Also, Bill Murray was the biggest holdout of any chance of a third film being made, having zero interest to return, and he was never a fan of sequels. Of course, we had the controversial reboot in 2016, which left most fans disappointed, with it being a clumsy remake of the 1984 film, and it failed at the box office. So Sony Pictures went back to the drawing board to get Ivan and his son involved in pursuing a sequel to the 1989 film, which certainly got the fan base excited. Jason Reitman considered that unlike the 3 prior Ghostbuster films, which all involved people going into the ghostbusting business, that he wanted to make this film about family first, and with fellow writer Gil Keenan, created a story based around the Spengler family and why they are so disconnected. Jason also felt it was appropriate to also change the setting from New York City to the American West. They give the film a new identity and a different colour palette. They would make use of Calgary in Alberta, Canada for its location. To many Superman fans, this is the same place where they filmed the Smallville sequences in Superman 1 and 3. The script was structured like a mystery to slowly reveal the connection the family have to Egon Spengler, which would then lead on to their history with the Ghostbusters. For the film's plot, we find Egon's estranged daughter and her 2 children, Trevor and Phoebe, being evicted from their home and forced to move into Egon's farm in Somerville, which has been left to them. The former receptionist of the Ghostbusters, Janine, pays the family a visit when they move in and informs Callie that Egon left behind a large amount of debt when she is already having money issues. Trevor goes to find work at a local diner and meets Lucky, and Phoebe is enrolled in summer school, where she makes friends with Podcast and is left under the supervision of Gary Gruberson, who has no interest in teaching them and is there to focus on the earthquakes that have been plaguing the town despite there being no fault lines. Later that evening, Phoebe finds a PKG meter and is starting to experience poltergeist activity, and she is led by an unseen ghost to a ghost trap, while Trevor goes into the barn and finds the Ecto-1. Phoebe takes the ghost trap to school, which gets the interest of Gary, who shows her and Podcast videos on the Ghostbusters. Phoebe, Gary and Podcast decide to open the ghost trap and accidentally release a ghost, which retreats to the mine under the mountain. Ghostly events start to increase, and Phoebe is led to an underground layer beneath the house, where she discovers the ghost-busting equipment. I was very excited to see Afterlife. We had all waited a long time. I had read some reviews, some were very positive and some were mixed, but it didn't detract at all from my anticipation to see it. I have enjoyed Jason Reitman's previous films, and once he was announced as the director, I thought he would be an ideal choice, having grown up with Ghostbusters around him, and I felt confident that he would treat the story with respect, and thankfully he does. I was utterly charmed by the movie, which is a word you wouldn't really associate with Ghostbusters. You wouldn't say Ghostbusters 1 and 2 were charming films, with Afterlife focusing on the family aspect, and it lays on the love for the original 1984 film. It very much has its heart on its sleeve. It may not be the story that Ghostbuster fans wanted to see or were expecting. This is the story that Jason wanted to tell, and I think he managed to achieve that. I certainly wasn't expecting this direction, but Ghostbusters was in dire need of going down a different road to try something new, but it also goes back on itself to familiar territory. The change of location does shift the feeling of it not being a Ghostbusters movie, so to speak. As the previous 2 films in the franchise, and including the reboot, New York is central to the core of the Ghostbusters. It's very much a part of it. It's like it's another character. so the shift did at first leave me a little disconnected, but I soon forgot about that and didn't care about the new setting shortly into the film, because the characters really took over and got me invested in this new story. The casting is spot on and everyone is great in it. The standout performances really go to McKenna Grace as Phoebe and Logan Kim as Podcast. They have a great friendship as they do their own investigating and finding out the history of the town. Paul Rudd I wish had more screen time. He plays his usual funny self, and watch out for the moment he walks into Walmart strutting like he is about to break out into a dance. Jason Reitman got the actors to really give natural performances. Nothing felt over the top and silly. No one is mugging camera or appearing to be ad-libbing. It all seems like well-timed deliveries of dialogue, with carefully added mannerisms to the cast to give them something extra to elevate those comedic moments. The comedy is different in a way to the 1984 film, as you don't have adults at the centre of it, you have kids thrown into the mix, so you have a different sensibility to it all, but it still worked for me. It's very much like an indie picture with a mix of horror and science fiction elements thrown in, and with a larger budget. What surprised me was that I wasn't waiting around for some ghost-busting action. I was more interested in seeing how these characters play out in the story, as they settle into this new town, and along the way they discover the secrets of the house and the earthquakes that have been shaking the town that leads on to their connection to the Ghostbusters. Now, when it comes down to fan service, it's always tough to balance. If you don't provide enough nods or winks to the previous films, then it feels somewhat disconnected. But if you go too far with the references, it becomes this crutch, as it relies on nostalgia to keep you entertained, and thus the story is not doing its job other than highlighting the past. Afterlife does play on the nostalgia, that's very obvious, but I think personally it balanced it well for the most part. If the reboot from 2016 never happened, you could argue the fan service in this film is totally justified. But because we've had a lot of Ghostbusters related stuff happening the past number of years, with merchandise and video games etc, it could be seen as a bit of an overdose. It's really down to what you want from a sequel, and all of us will have a different opinion on that. I think fans will argue this for a number of years. It boils down to how far a director can go with looking to the past to give the audience that nostalgic hit. The score, for example, very much relies on the original music from the 1984 film by composer Elmer Bernstein. The composer Rob Simonson takes those original themes and adapts them for the new film, which pleased me tremendously. Often with sequels they ditch the themes and create something new, very much like Ghostbusters 2. It had a completely different score, which to be fair I quite liked, but it did lose some of the magic, so having the original music return was a good move, and I think the composer did a good job. It's like what John Ottman did with Superman Returns by creating new music to make that fit with the old. If for example Randy Edelman, who worked on Ghostbusters 2, had come back, I wouldn't have complained, because there are parts of the film where I think his style would have fit nicely. But anyway, if you love film scores of the past, especially for the big blockbusters, you will certainly love this. I would say the biggest problem of the Ghostbusters series is that the plot has always repeated itself. Ghostbusters 2 was heavily criticised at the time for being a retread of the original film. Critics called it a lazy sequel, and the reboot followed the same path. They make some alterations here and there, but it's the mentality of giving audiences something new but make it very familiar. Often the case, it results in the story following a similar structure. Afterlife come the third act, you are seeing things that you are very familiar with. You may not have a problem with that, but it does come across as a little lazy and rushed. The first two acts had a nice pace to them, and I honestly wanted more. I felt scenes had been cut or trimmed out come the third act, as it rushes to the end. The visual effects are very competent. The FX team have made a very conscious effort to match what had been done before. The terror dogs, for example, up close are puppets and do look really good. Everything is very consistent and to a high quality. Nothing blew me away though, but I didn't see one effects shot that looked out of place or unfinished. I highly recommend Ghostbusters Afterlife. I would give it a rating of 4 out of 5 or possibly a 3.5. I do have some nitpicking issues with it, which I will explore more in a spoiler discussion, but I was left totally entertained by it once it finished. I felt good as I walked out of the cinema. It was heartwarming, funny, it had a couple of effective jump scares, and it was just full of charm as mentioned earlier. What really impressed me was that it had that 1980s vibe to it. Despite being set in modern times, the direction and how the kids interacted, it felt like the Goonies, for example, with how you see the kids talk and how they communicate with adults. It just played well with the comedy, and it just had a solid tone that was consistent throughout. Not everyone is going to love this film, and some may be annoyed with the direction they have taken, but I'm sure there will be many that feel happy that they have finally made a satisfying sequel to Ghostbusters, and I personally look forward to seeing where they take it next.
Who you gonna call? Hey, have you missed it?